Thank you for being here. In fact, thank you for sticking it out, given that this is kind of the end of the, or at least approaching the end of it. So I have a lot to cover, so I'm going to move pretty fast as I usually do. I always challenge myself to say as much as I can. In Germany, I got dinged for, we don't speak English, please slow down, which I actually took to heart, but here I think I can get away with it. So just for those of you who don't know who I am, my background is that I actually was on the HoloLens team, and I was in the part of the HoloLens org that was doing some pretty amazing partnerships with companies that you may have heard of, like NASA JPL, Autodesk, and Trimble. So I was actually actively involved in the early exploration of why mixed reality is important, and I'm starting to use the term spatial computing. I think it actually speaks nicely to what this industry is actually becoming. And it really, we took an authentic approach where we kind of challenged ourselves to always make sure that we were really identifying real value. So those are some of the learnings that I took with me to start Object Theory. And Object Theory is a company I founded 4 years ago with Raven Zachary. And we basically are seen as a trusted advisor for enterprise companies. And we typically go in with a strategic eye and actually help them with strategy. And then we move into typically an implementation project or implementation project. And we also have a platform called Prism, which is something that we're deploying more and more of our delivered solutions in this Prism platform. So let's get to the meat of it. So I want to start with the promise of spatial computing. Where did it all start? Well, I think these images should resonate with everybody in this room. You're going to use your hands to do things on virtual screens, and you're going to have the car tell you everything, and you're going to have whales jumping out of the water even with nothing on your face. And then, of course, all the Prometheus kinds of things where you have all these situation rooms in Avatar where you're able to see everything that's happening across a giant field or a giant company or whatever. And so this is kind of the gleam in the eye that probably will come true, but we are definitely not there yet. So when I was putting this deck together, I didn't even realize I was putting together something that matches the hype cycle. But it turns out that this kind of is a presentation about the hype cycle. And so I'm sure this probably is pretty familiar. It was put out by Gartner, and it's basically showing a typical graph of a disruptive moment in time that creates a lot of excitement, then a lot of reality hits, and then you start figuring out, okay, well, how do you work within reality? And that is largely what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to start at the we are here, the peak of inflated expectations. So to tee that up, I think most of you know this. I'm going to go through this pretty fast, but I at least want to tee up why we even care about spatial computing. And if there's any audience that probably knows that well, it would be this one. But I still like to tee it up because it really guides us every day. And I think that it is healthy for it to guide everything that we do, which is to really be honest about why we're doing this. So the biggest one is leveraging binocular vision. We are born to understand, we've evolved to understand our world with binocular vision. So every time that I put on a device and look at something that I've prior rotated in 2.5D on a screen, I just realized why this is so relevant. And especially with point cloud data, which was quite profound, actually. And I've spoken about that before, so I won't again. So here's the other thing that is just lights up over and over again. We're constantly trying to understand something that doesn't exist yet, a space or a product, even a concept. And it's really hard sometimes when it's spatial, when it's something that's spatial understanding. Believe it or not, that is actually the new Microsoft campus that's being built right now. They tore down the original buildings and are building a new campus. So they made a VR experience where it wasn't mixed reality, but where you can experience this new campus even though it doesn't exist yet. That's an actual VW concept car that down there, and then I think it's actually just a concept, non-Apple concept for some future Apple device. So the other thing so you have the AR that's in your hand. And I'm speaking, and just to be clear, I'm speaking largely about where the enterprise value is something you're wearing that lets you see your world while you're also seeing 3D. And one of the big things that things like the HoloLens and magically give you is to truly, truly see something at its actual scale. And this is just really profound because we often want to understand the spatial relationships between things, and it's really hard on a screen or even with VR. You're missing a lot of the cues that we use as humans to really understand scale. So this is a really big, impactful part of why this is important. So one of the others is to be able to see invisible data in space. We have a lot of data in the world already that's 3D in nature, and it's getting more and more prevalent. You know, we're starting to get sensors that are deployed everywhere. You have weather satellites all over the place. And how do you visualize all this data? We may know everything there is about all the thermostats in a building and whether air vents are turned on or not. And there's a lot of opportunity to take all that information and actually visualize relationships between data and understand concepts that just may not be accessible in any other way, where, again, taking advantage of stereoscopic vision gives you an advantage. So a lot of these obviously dovetail together and support each other. So this is one of the cool ones. It's a little bit like invisible data, but we're surrounded by radio waves and heat, and we have lots of things that we care about that are super small. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could just see these small things and infrared things in a way that you can glean the information that just isn't accessible to us? Now, obviously, we do this on screens, but again, if that data is 3D in nature, to be able to experience that actually in 3D, like that's a tiny little worm from a thermal vent. And so you can imagine that microscopic worm, to experience it in 3D instead of just as a photo, is just a whole different experience. Telling stories. I don't know if anybody in this room saw Destination Mars, but Destination Mars was a pretty profound experience to actually be able to visualize what it might be like to be standing on Mars. I was on the NASA JPL project at Microsoft, and it was profound to be able to do that. Geologists who actually do this every day were crying. It was pretty profound to see the impact it's having on that, and art and other endeavors like museums. So this is one of my favorites. I happen to have an embedded systems background. So for me to start exploring what it means to actually have everything in your environment that is giving us data, to be able to give it back to you where the data makes sense and understand the three-dimensional relationships between the data. All right, and finally, so practice spatial skills with feedback. This is lighting up big time. I'm at this particular AWE, I'm hearing so much talk about just the idea that you can learn a skill and even guide a skill using the fact that we can learn better if you're actually seeing where things are in space that you're supposed to be doing as opposed to 2D. All right, so here's the sobering part. So that is why we're doing this, but now it's the sobering part. And it became even more sobering as I was putting this together, because I came up with a lot of reasons why this is hard today. So I believe today, and this is just my personal opinion, but I believe we are in the trough of disillusionment right now. And the good news is there's a happy ending. There's a happy ending. Spoiler alert. So I broke down all the challenges that we face as a company into 4 categories. I won't enumerate them here because I'm going to talk about each one of them. The first one is environment, and I'm sure that everybody in this room is struggling with this. Like, how do you take this outdoors? How do you do it in big spaces? How do you use it in spaces that have lots of glass and mirrors? How do you do it in spaces that have flat colors or repeating patterns? And just to even know that these limitations exist, we train a lot of our clients to just even know what the boundaries are, what you can and can't do. Hardware. I mean, we all know that we want hardware that is more capable than it is today. I'm happy to report that I've had a decent amount of time on HoloLens 2, and HoloLens 2 is addressing a lot of it. It's just so exciting. This is a really exciting year. HoloLens 2 is moving the needle. I am absolutely confident in that. And when I was putting this together, it was this, like, yep, check, yep, check, yep, check. So these are very short term. A lot of these are actually very short term at this point, which is really exciting. I'm not going to read it all, but you get the idea that there's lots of things that the military needs. There's a lot of things that you need when you're out on an oil rig where you have no Wi-Fi. We have a lot of requests for when it's online, I want it to be centrally managed with content management systems, but when it's offline, because I'm in the far reaches of Canada, I need it to work offline too. Okay, well, remote rendering becomes very difficult if you have to have the offline version and the online version. So these are all the kinds of challenges that we're faced today with just trying to make sense of all of this, and also to actually build deployable solutions. And it is challenging. I mean, we are faced every day with every single thing that you see in this list has come from an actual discussion with a client. It's not just me standing up here making up these challenges. They come from our clients. And obviously everybody knows that, well, certainly AirTap wasn't enough, and now the full gestures of Holland's 2 are amazing, and it's going to take us a long way. My concern is everybody's going to come up with different ways of doing gestures. I wish there were better human interface guidelines. If anybody wants to write a really good book on that, I suggest that this industry needs that. I tried to encourage Microsoft to do it, but not that there wasn't interest, but they weren't quite there yet. Ergonomics. Everybody wants the thing that just looks like glasses. Maybe even, I mean, obviously when you go there, you can talk about contact lenses and embedded, you know, like wetware. But the gleam in our eye is glasses that are talking to the cloud via the edge compute, where your compute is actually being provisioned on the edge and not on your device. At first, the edge is probably the phone in your pocket, but it's going to quickly, with 5G, going to transition to the edge actually being the future of Wi-Fi boxes. Your Wi-Fi box is going to have compute, and you're going to be able to provision compute. If it's your own at home or your company's, you don't have to pay for it, but if it's at Starbucks, you'll just have some subscription where you're paying a certain amount a month to be allowed to use that edge compute to run your awesome experiences on your glasses. Natural language processing, you can imagine that, well, first of all, there's the whole problem of everybody talking to their computers in a room, but sadly, I suspect that will become normal. But the important thing is, that is the most natural way of inputting information for most people, is to actually just say it and have it actually understand what you're saying. And you know, we're getting closer and closer on that journey, but that journey is a complex journey and we're not quite there yet. And you still have to know that it's you and not the person standing 3 feet away from you too, which is another challenge. So value. Now, interestingly, the value problem in a lot of ways isn't where you think it is. I hear a lot of people ask me, like, don't people think that a $3,000 device is expensive or a $5,000 device is expensive? And I can honestly say not a single one of our clients has ever said it is the cost of the device that is making it not a viable solution right now. It is all about the other piece of the puzzle. Give me an app that somebody else has already written that runs their device so I don't have to spend $1 million or $10 million creating the future Photoshop because I want future Photoshop. I'm just using Photoshop as an example. I do not suggest putting Photoshop on Holland. I'm just meaning that future thing that makes sense to have in 3D. If that existed and I could pay a reasonable amount of money, it is worth $3,000 for the device. I look back when I bought my first Mac 2, and if you do the math with inflation, it basically, I spent over $6,000 on my first Mac if you adjust for inflation. And you just think like $3,000 is nothing if it's solving a real problem. But there is, you know, building out the back-end infrastructure to support this, dealing with optimization pipelines for your content, dealing with web rendering, how do you manage your spatial anchors? There are all these challenges that everybody's chipping away at, everybody's doing it, but it's just starting to gel enough to actually deliver a real solution. And so this is just one of those areas where every software and hardware journey has to go through this, where the tool chains and the infrastructure and the design tools all have to mature to be able to get us there. And it's exciting. This year, I'm seeing more and more actual real deployed apps that actually are solving real problems, where you can literally just buy the software and not fund a large development initiative. So I'm seeing a pretty nice transition happening this year in particular. Open standards. I just went to the AR Cloud Symposium. I encourage anybody who really cares about where this is heading. I was so glad that I went to that. There's so many passionate people think about this, and it is so critical to everything that people in this room want to do, because interoperability across all these different pieces of the puzzle is so critical, but if not nothing else but efficiency. But more importantly, for everything to actually work the way that a person or a user wants it to work, so that everything really does fit together and accomplishes the goals that you want, and can be deployed on every device that's out there, because the standards are universal. They're not the siloed standard of a Google or an Apple or even a Microsoft. I mean, thankfully, Microsoft is adopting more and more open standards and open source. So I think honestly, I believe Apple will be one of the ones that will take the longest to adopt some of these, and not necessarily across the board, but at this moment, that would be my prediction. Software tools and services. I'm sure everybody in here that's ever tried to develop rapidly on the entire end-to-end tool chain of Unity knows that there's a lot of room for improvement, especially now with the IL to CPP adds yet another layer of complexity. It makes it harder and harder to actually understand the code when you're debugging. And again, all these are fixable. It's just we're still not there yet. We're not at the point where it's actually efficient to build a solution from end to end, test the solution, do performance monitoring, and nail your 60 frames per second. All of that is still a work in progress at this point. And that goes for the content side too. I mean, for us to laboriously build every content scenario in Unity, and this is not dissing Unity. Unity is amazing. I mean, we could not do what we do without Unity. So don't take this as anything negative about Unity. It's just, it takes time to figure all these things out. And Unity, along with everybody else, is still on that journey of trying to figure out all the things that make it easy to create content and also then to make it efficient to create content. And content in this use, I'm meaning both software and the actual three-dimensional and two-dimensional assets. All right, so that's kind of the trough of disillusionment that we've been in, and I certainly think that a lot of the people in this room, based on my own conversations, feel that kind of rings true. I know there's been a lot of success stories that are starting to emerge, and that's kind of where I'm at now. It's like, we're coming out of the trough of disillusionment, and we're starting to be enlightened. And enlightenment at this point is part learnings, right? Learning what to build, how to navigate around all the challenges and all the limitations. So that's enlightenment. But then there's also HoloLens 2 is just around the corner. It will open up, it will eliminate a large number of the current challenges. I mean, just there's all the back-end systems that I hear about here and elsewhere. All of those pieces of the puzzle are starting to happen, and we're starting to figure out how to use them. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time that we want to do something. So I'm really excited about that. So this is just, I don't think this is new news to anybody, but the triggers that have caused a lot of this excitement started, I mean, there are a lot of triggers before this, and there's been a lot of VR and AR stuff that happened before this, but Microsoft HoloLens announcement truly changed how everybody looks at what's happening. And then Magic Leap announced, of course, made it feel even more real and legitimate. And then HoloLens release, Pokemon Go, I don't necessarily think is in the category of what I'm talking about as far as enterprise solutions, but it did make a big difference in how people perceive this industry and where it's heading and the promise it has. That really did light up promise. That was part of that promise beginning that I was talking about. And now we have the Magic Leap release, HoloLens 2 announcement. So that journey is obviously going to go on forever. But the cool thing about it, and I talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people confirm that almost everybody's moving from concept videos, POCs, event trade show demo, and the kinds of things that you might do just to get more money, to show the board. That has been, even the nature of my own company, has been what we've been doing the past 4 years. But more and more, we're being asked to go from a small POC to get the bigger money to now actually being asked to deliver the real thing. And that's going to feed into some of the platform stuff that I'm going to talk about later. But we're moving more towards true MVPs where you can go out there and measure it, and then pilots where you're measuring, getting user research and feedback, and then production. And I mean, our first production solution was the Striker by design companion for HoloLens. That was pretty early. That was actually that's the reason I started that bar as far back as I did, is because it's not just us. I mean, so like Trimble SketchUp is in that category too. But there were a few early true deployable solutions. And that's production. The Striker stuff is production. So many of you probably have heard me speak my 18 identified use cases. So these are all the patterns that I've seen over the last 4 years. Pretty much everything I've experienced. These are pretty high-level categories. So there's plenty of subcategories under these. But these are definitely the big ones that we've identified as categorizing just about everything that I've ever heard of. And I'm always asking for anybody who sees ones that don't fit one of these for me to tell me so I can update my broader or the whole, since I share everything, the broader understanding of what's going on. But here's the cool thing. These are the ones that we're actually delivering on. These skills training, task guidance, those go hand in hand. Annotated environment is lighting up more and more. little less than task and skills training. Premium selling, we do a lot of premium selling solutions for our clients. It is actually viable today. Situation planning, where you've got a lot of information about a situation and you just want to bring it into a room. That kind of dovetails with the annotated environment. Annotated environment is a little bit about putting it where it is. And then situation planning is the digital twin version of the annotated environment. Collaboration, obviously, collaboration is critical. I would say, though, that I see collaboration mainly as an amplifier for the actual use cases. So it's kind of this, amplifier that amplifies everything else. Collaboration with premium selling is even more powerful. Collaboration with skills training is more valuable when you want a remote lecturer to be part of that conversation. Remote assist comes up a lot. It actually is a real viable use case that we even have clients asking us to build. And of course, Microsoft has a solution. And in medical imaging, we haven't done anything more than prototypes in medical imaging, but it definitely comes a lot in conversations, and there's a lot of activity out there, as you probably all know. All right, so this is not the end-all framework for identifying the current opportunities, but I was trying to codify in a way where if you are trying to build something for spatial computing, and I'm talking mainly, the wearable devices like HoloLens and Magic Leap where you can see your world. If you can say yes to any one in a row, for every row, you probably have something that's worth pursuing today. And I'll give you two examples because I know that's a little bit vague. The first example is the very operating room design tool that I was telling you about. So this is premium selling. It's clearly an indoor solution, right? So indoors, check. We got something that works on the first line. Data entry, minimal, if actually none in this particular case. Content scale. Well, this is large content. It's an operating room, right? But we also offer dollhouse scale and quarter scale. And so we do a lot of clever things to make sure that we're dealing with scale. Content fidelity, no surprise, color. Anybody who wants really, really good color, we're probably not there yet. And then all the issues. I won't even go into some of these because they're just so ubiquitous. We all know about them. Environmental context, light industrial and office, but not heavy industrial. Just connectivity. We're getting a lot of asks for LAN-only mode. Well, can we deliver this for LAN-only mode? If you can say yes, then great. If that meets the need, great. If it doesn't meet the need, if you don't have LAN but you can't meet the need, you shouldn't be building it yet potentially. And again, it's just guidelines, right? Spatial anchoring, same thing, and then comfort. I think everybody agrees that it is not quite ready for somebody to wear this 8 hours a day. And we're not that far away, but not today. CM Smith, very similar. I'm not going to go into details because it's very similar. I just wanted to give a couple of examples of how this could be used to classify what might be a good thing to build today. All right, so wrapping it up. Based on everything we're hearing, we are only focusing on enterprise. Based on everything we're hearing, delivering to enterprise is really, really hard. And the only way we have been able to see how to do it in any real way is to take a platform approach. Probably the most critical thing that we've realized is that to integrate all of the use cases into one instead of having a bunch of siloed use cases has been a really, well, first of all, it's a powerful capability if you can pull it off. It's not necessarily easy to pull off. But what we're seeing is there's a lot of features that actually are important across multiple different use cases. And if you want, for example, if you want remote assist while you're in there doing training because you almost figured it out by yourself, but you need the expert to help you just for 5 minutes, it'd be weird to have to completely quit out of your training solution just to launch your remote assist solution to get that and then go back to your training solution, which is a lot of the kinds of things that happen now. So we're taking, we're taking an approach where it's all put together. I mean, I think a lot of these are obvious. Enterprise scale, you gotta go for enterprise scale because these clients, I mean, the number of things the hoops we've been asked to go through for our bigger enterprise customers, you just have to be prepared for that. You're gonna be asked for these things. Off-prem, authentication, I mean, there's just a whole matrix of the kinds of things that everybody's asking us for, and you just have to build for that right up front. Here's the important thing. Everything has to be flexible because you can't depend on things not changing. Things are changing so fast. If you just think you know it and you build it, and then you get 5 more requests from new clients that aren't in your mind, and you're thinking about how you built it, now you have an architecture that's not going to be flexible enough for you to add those. You need to be able to find ways to add those quickly using the various object-oriented patterns like adapters to make that possible. Managing everything in cloud, every enterprise is so complex. The idea that you're not managing your data and content in the cloud is just a non-starter. I already talked about adapters, but in this case, it's for integrating into various backend systems. Like we're being asked to integrate into a learning management system. It's a non-starter if you can't integrate into a learning management system. Device agnostic, 2D devices and 3D devices, largely based on cost and who has what. And then white labeling. A lot of our customers actually want to deploy something to give to their own customers, and they want it to look like their product, not Object Theory's product. So this is basically just a diagram of our own enterprise platform. It actually does speak to a lot of things I just talked about. What we have is we have a bunch of back-end capabilities that we already have integrated and others that are going to be integrated as clients ask for it. The core features on the left-hand side are these amplifiers where they probably apply to at least half, if not more, of the use cases. So you want them across the board. To have annotations in when you're doing training, but they disappear when you're doing guided tasks doesn't make sense. That you probably want to put it there so that it's extra information when you do the guided task. But you also want it when you're training. And just one of a gazillion examples of how they all dovetail together. And then, of course, we're standing up use cases one at a time. A lot of the core features can do some of these already, but the idea is that we will chip away at adding use case specific features in addition to the core features. Prism is already being used for quite a number of things. It's being used for collaboration, obviously, that's kind of our heritage, but we're seeing that now as just water. You have to have collaboration. It's just an amplifier. It's just supporting other use cases. So it's almost like a cheat now because I almost don't even think of it as its own use case anymore. Because unless the object of interest does what you need to do, you can't deploy it. If it's just a static object, and that's, now, there are places where that is fine, like product design, static might actually be okay. Space planning, static might be okay. But if it can't be interactive and do all the things you want to do, that in that conversation you're having with other people, it only solves certain particular specific use cases. Task guidance, this one's actually kind of a museum, but what I more normally think in enterprise is not a museum task guidance, but you know, the task guidance of a worker who is trying to solve a problem in a factory or an airplane or other. Space planning, I think that one's pretty obvious. Just large and small spaces. Premium selling, Stryker is a premium selling scenario. Design review, again, within limits. If there are limits like color, if it's about color, you don't do it. And then conceptual education, a three-dimensional concept that you just need to learn. We're doing something for UA Canada in Canada to learn trade skills, and we built a high-pressure steam system. We're showing the simulations of all the steam and the water precipitating out and teaching all the concepts of how that works. All right, I did it. All right, thank you, everybody, and I actually have some time for questions. All right. So I have some queued up, but I would also take some from the audience if there's any in the audience. Any questions in the audience? All right. So how long, in your opinion, before the technology matures? This is a really good question. I mean, I have my opinion. I personally think that within 10 years, it's going to be something that's quite wearable and will have enough software out there that you actually would want to wear it all the time. And you know, maybe it's still situational at first, but I think the 5G infrastructure to support that will already be in place, and the devices will start appearing from companies like Apple and others. And enough of the things I talked about will be in place in the 10-year time frame, and I believe you will start seeing, just like the early earbud days where you're like, who's that weirdo with a weird earbud in their ears? Like, they're out in public with that. We're gonna certainly be at or past that phase, I believe, in about 10 years. As far as deployable solutions, I mean, I honestly believe, well, first of all, I will say, even HoloLens 1 is already in that category of I can create deployable solutions with it. So in some ways, it already is there. But HoloLens 2 moves that needle quite a bit, and I do believe that within 3 to 5 years, it's more a matter of software at this point. Once the software exists, that we will see something that you might actually call a mature market, if you include hardware and software for technology. All right, apparently I'm out of time. All right, well, thank you, everybody.